started.
And Tasha's on the phone, by the way.
And Tasha's on the phone, right? So that means we've got like
You got a quorum.
7 of us here. Okay. So let's call the meeting to order. Everyone have a chance to take a quick peek at the agenda, and if you like what you see, I would hear a motion to approve.
Second.
Any opposition to that? Very good. So starting off, we're going to hear from the assembly. We've got our main focus. What's pressing right now are the proposals for new revenue measures, and there are two that have been proposed. I know that they could still be somebody could still propose something at the next assembly meeting. I have no idea if that's likely to happen, but Mr. Dunbar, do you want to start off by speaking to these two ordinances?
Sure, and I apologize, while you guys are talking, I'm going to be eating my breakfast and lunch in the form of this soup. I haven't been able to eat anything yet today. But just very briefly, so I see you have a proposed 2020, doesn't look like you have Project 2020 on your agenda today. Is there someone going to be speaking to the proposed?
Oh, so for Project 20?
Yeah, yeah.
So we had a work session in December, and Moira did speak at that.
Okay. So, I mean, that was, I think, the proposal you were alluding to. It hasn't been proposed yet. There's a chance they'd have to lay it on the table on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, if they wanted it to make the 2020 ballot. We'd have to vote for it on the 28th. I can't speak to whether or not that's going to happen. I knew the last I'd heard they don't have a sponsor.
Right.
Because, as most of you probably know, we have to set our ballot several months in advance so the clerk's office can get everything on the ballot. I think there's also a legal requirement. If we want to go and have a plebiscite, if we want to go ask for a vote of the people, and that includes anything outside the tax cap, we have to get it done by the 28th, by the meeting on the 28th of January. So the two main proposals that are sort of already before the body that had been proposed in December that we've been debating are this an alcohol tax and a general sales tax. And you probably have either attended or at least heard about the town halls that we had. We had one yesterday, one 2 days ago, another one yesterday, and there'll be another tonight. I unfortunately, because of some other commitments, was only able to attend the one at the LUSAC on Tuesday, which I thought went really well. And then the one last night, apparently in Shigeki River, was, I don't know who all went there, if anyone here went there, but supposedly it was well attended and not as angry as you would have thought. Actually pretty interesting. So the two proposals, just very quickly, you probably have heard of them. What's that?
That's because they're all legal exiting.
Well, if they want a bunch of school bond debt, they can to go with them, and to massively increase their property taxes, they can consider doing that. Anyway, so the alcohol tax, there are two versions. There's the version that myself and Austin Quinn Davidson and Felix Rivera proposed that is a fairly simple 5% tax with very specific things that can be dedicated to. It was designed to try to address some of the specific concerns we heard about last year's alcohol tax, so it's a quite different proposal. And then there's also an S version that was proposed by Meg Zolotel and John Weddleton that is a 2% tax that can increase to 5% that expires after, well, it's more complicated. I don't know the whole thing off the top of my head. Has a reporting requirement, which I think we're probably going to absorb into the initial proposal. Theirs is requires 60% to pass. Ours uses the constitutional option to change the charter at the same time, so it's 50% plus 1. I think those will probably be debated, and there's some chance that one of them will make the ballot and be voted on January 14th, so this coming Tuesday. There's also a general sales tax proposal, a 3% tax proposed by Fred Dyson. There would be a temporary tax dedicated to a variety of public safety sort of topics. We had a good debate at the Public Safety Committee meeting yesterday about some of the specifics there. It's a 30-page document or so. If you get a chance to look through it, it's very complicated in terms of what's exempt, what's not. You got rid of the use tax. So there's those kind of administrative questions. There's also questions about where exactly it could be sort of what it's going to fund. Mr. Dyson was very open, though, yesterday to revising that. I mean, there's some very basic changes, like, for example, he dedicates it to parole, but we don't do parole supervision. We don't even do probation supervision, but there are many more people on probation supervision than parole supervision, so that makes more sense for us to potentially fund. Or things like, he says, prosecutors and support staff without, be explicit that if we increase the number of prosecutors, we also have to increase the number of defense attorneys. So there's but he was very open to making those kind of changes. This is also he maintains the 3/5 requirement under the old tax cap. No sales tax has gotten, I think, above 40%. No sales tax proposal in the history of bankers got above 40%. So the chances they get 60%, I'm very skeptical of it. So while I appreciate this, I think this doesn't have quite as much support, partly because I think that I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but for myself at least, this is sort of illusory. That is, we actually want revenue. We really want and need revenue. The alcohol tax failed by 6% with a very large campaign against it and nothing really for it. No sales tax has sniffed anywhere near 50%, let alone 60%. So if we're actually trying to raise revenues, I'll take this much smaller. I mean, it's 10 to 15 million from an alcohol tax versus up to 100 million from the sales tax. But if the chances of the sales tax passing are close to zero, then the actual expected value of that is close to zero. Whereas perhaps there's a greater chance of the alcohol tax passing. But that'll be the debate on Tuesday. I'm sure you probably read Fred's proposal. It also includes one half would go to property tax relief, which in some ways is good and helps the politics of the matter. It does make a regressive sales tax even more regressive, given the nature of our sort of property tax base and the fact that I think there's less evidence that the rental incomes come down when you lower property tax, as obviously people in houses, their property taxes go down. So I think that's something that we'll be discussing. There's also a $200 cap on the sales tax, which again makes it even more regressive. So for very large, expensive purchases, it's capped. So wealthier folks will pay a smaller percentage of their income towards the sales taxes. Lower income folks who have a bunch of smaller purchases. So Meg Zolotel in particular has talked about amending that cap out, which would make it less regressive, but also means if you bought a $40,000 car in Anchorage, it would be $1,200 in sales tax. So chances are you wouldn't buy a car in Anchorage. So I think that were this to go to the ballot, you'd see in that form, you'd see a very dedicated effort from certain large dollar item purveyors to kill this sales tax too. That's kind of all I have. Any specific questions on any of those proposals or on the town halls or anything on the process?
Yeah,
Forrest, do you know exactly, I think we were given this information before, I just want to try to remember, how much it will cost to do the administration for the new tax, and how much will actually go to the services, directly to the services that...
The alcohol tax administrative overhead is very small, but I mean, Lance can speak better to that. The sales tax, it's a number of dedicated employees, and so it is some amount of money. It's relatively small compared to the 100 million or whatever you would raise with it. Lance, can you speak more?
So, Forrest is correct. For the alcohol tax, the ability to administer it would be relatively small. I think they would probably require maybe a staff of none or up to 3 in Treasury to sort of administer that.
For the alcohol tax.
For the alcohol tax, and it wouldn't matter which version was on. The sales tax is a totally different animal. It would take probably up to maybe 20 plus people inside Treasury. They basically have to really bulk up. They probably have to kick in about $5 to $7 million in technology right away to sort of manage that, and then it's an average of about $3 million a year to support the sales tax efforts, and that is getting it started, assuming that it's at that place, and then the other thing that I think Mr. Dyson's proposal is that it's, and I think maybe Mr. Dunbar mentioned it, it's only for 6 years. So it's going to take some time to kick it up, and then we're going to spend amount of money for 6 years if it's done that. And then the electorate could basically say we like it, we could go, or we don't like it and turn it off. But then And then how do we manage that? We would likely manage it through attrition. I mean, that's how we would do it, but it's a significant amount of ramp up time on the sales tax. However, as Forrest mentioned, the alcohol is probably right around 10 to 15, maybe $1 million. The sales tax, giving the provisions that Mr. Dyson has in there, it's 90 to 100 million. And if we put 50% towards property tax relief, that would be 50 million that would be available for the services that Mr. Dyson had mentioned. And, I mean, I think in the stuff that I gave you, Fred explained why he was doing his, and I think in Forrest and others. So,
Yeah,
sales tax costs a lot more, takes longer to get done, but the return on the revenue would be much higher. The alcohol tax is more simplistic. It's on a shorter window, and that's kind of that answers your question, Carl.
I think it's also interesting the justification for Fred's sales tax and for the alcohol tax are almost exactly the same. I mean, there's some semantics difference, there's some targeting differences, but really it's about, we all think that there are serious public safety challenges in Anchorage, and we're trying to get to the root of some of those challenges, including homelessness, and those things are not exactly the same, but they have some overlap. Our alcohol tax is dedicated to treatment, to behavioral health, to police officers and first responders, that's the way it's phrased, not public safety more generally, and to programs that are evidence-based, that are proven to help reduce domestic violence, child abuse, and sexual assault, which we have heard from our constituents, and I think on the body we feel are of particular importance within the broader public safety context. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. And I think there's also, I wouldn't say consensus, but there is a feeling amongst a lot of people in the body that we're going to choose one. We're unlikely to send them both to the ballot because that increases the chance that they just both fail. Because people will be like, well, some people are just. I mean, I've seen polling data that suggests that between 30 and 40% of people in Anchorage will just not vote for any tax ever. So, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, we are not going to vote for this. And so, then if you give them two options, I think the people that might vote for something will sort of choose one or the other, and you increase the chances that both of them fail. So, insofar as assembly members actually want to increase the revenue, I think we'll probably choose. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Forrest, can you speak to your alcohol tax? Is the money going into a separate kind of protected fund? Is it just going into the general fund, but then that dollar amount is kind of earmarked for this? I remember last time there was a lot of talk. People were very worried that it was going to be used, that the money itself, although we are committing here to using it on certain things, that it would legally that wouldn't hold up, and so it needed to be in a separate protected fund and that sort of thing.
Interesting. No, our proposal doesn't create a separate protected fund. I'm not sure how that would work exactly.
It could totally work. I mean, if we track it through Treasury,
Okay.
and we know how much is coming in. We track how much is coming in from marijuana from the source.
Oh, yeah.
It's up to the assembly whether or not they want to set it aside for a particular purpose, or put it into a fund, and then we spend it
So I think
on any service.
The intention was we're going to add. There's going to be an amendment to add a reporting requirement to ours, and that was just an oversight. It wasn't, it wasn't something we were opposed to. I think the idea is to dedicate it, and then to have oversight where we tell people have reporting and then where we spend them. So that to me is like the way you protect it. Now, if people want some additional kind of like literal separate account, I think that's a fine idea. I don't think it would actually provide much actual like
Additional.
security, but if that makes people feel better, I mean, I want it to pass. So anything, even things that aren't really, like for example, we put in here language that says we cannot increase it above 5% without a vote of the people. That is legally already the case. That was the case with the last one, but we heard radio ads and saw pictures of like they're going to keep increasing it after 5%, and that was just a lie. But you're trying to insulate things using legal language. So that's an interesting idea. Maybe I'll talk to Lance and my colleagues after this, and maybe we'll do an amendment to try to create a separate, legally separate account. That makes people feel better. That's fine.
Is language the language that says that it shall only be available for those items? Is the assembly have to follow that down to the letter?
I think I only have the S version, unfortunately, of the alcohol tax. We don't have the original in your packets for whatever reason. So,
But the S just strikes out the text from the original,
so,
correct?
yeah, so if I look at the original,
I was looking at page 2, dedication of proceeds.
funding for police and first responders, funding to combat and address child, that's what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, what's your question again?
So essentially, there's the issue where if spending is mandated in a certain ordinance, the assembly can do something different with the budget because you're not bound, like, a prior assembly can't bind you to a certain type of.
This is gonna be in the, this is gonna be in the charter.
But because it's an initiative, it's in the charter, and so it's binding in a stronger way.
Yeah, that is definitely our feeling and our interpretation. This will bind the assembly. But I mean, I will say that these things are, Jesus said the poor will always be with us, and I just think that we will always have need to address domestic violence. Unfortunately, in this city, it's not such a huge amount of money that these 3 buckets. Maybe we will functionally eliminate homelessness, God willing. But I think that we will still have a need for substance abuse treatment and dealing with child abuse and domestic violence. And we had a conversation with Trevor Storrs about this, who runs Alaska Children's Trust, and he was like, you could dedicate all $15 million to just this issue and not solve it. I mean, given how much the state has pulled back on these things, and the fact that we actually, a lot of these buckets, we don't fund really at all directly. People think that the municipality spends a lot of money on homelessness directly. This was the first year we actually operationalized a lot of that money, right? We pay a lot of things through like secondary and tertiary costs with first responders and with, through health and social services, but we don't directly fund things. And so I think that my interpretation is, yes, the future assemblies will be bound by this, but I think it's okay.
When the marijuana retail tax was adopted, that didn't go on the ballot, did it?
It did.
Oh, it did?
It did.
Did that pass by over?
It did, actually. So when I said that in my head, I was thinking like there was one exception, which was when we decided to tax marijuana.
And that passed by over 60%?
I think it was like 61,
Yeah.
62.
Wow.
But that was a really unique set of circumstances where the marijuana industry themselves were supportive.
Yeah.
That they were not resisting at all.
Sure.
And so we didn't get the kind of misinformation we got last year from the alcohol industry.
Yeah. I think it'll be, at my community council meeting last night, there was sort of some discussion about like, oh, why are you simply targeting the alcohol industry? It's like, well, we have a tax on the marijuana industry as well.
And cigarettes, and a room tax, and a rental car tax. We have these quote-unquote targeted taxes. And by the way, it's funny, with the restaurant industry has come out and opposed to the alcohol tax, but they would be hit harder by the sales tax, because then the entire bill would be not just the alcohol portion. And by the way, we exempt groceries, so their direct competitors would not pay the tax, versus the alcohol tax, where everybody who purveys alcohol is subject to it. So it is interesting. The rhetoric has just been really interesting.
Through the chair, are you saying we don't have a current alcohol tax at all?
Not in the city.
Oh.
We have-
And,
Excise tax at the state level.
There's a state tax. There's no local
It
tax.
doesn't have to come back to the municipality.
Yeah.
refresh me on how much the marijuana tax is?
5%. And it had the option to raise to 7%, and it didn't.
And then, through the chair, do either of these offer the option to offset other spending that the municipality would do? Or is it just for new services? I understand the reason for both, I'm just curious.
So the intent is for new services, not to offset. And the S version includes language that mandates that, and that might find its way into our version if that's something people want. I think that it's really hard to police that, if that makes sense. Like, going forward, like, if we hire 6 new police officers, and then in 10 years, we hire more police officers or whatever it is, well, was that money from this or from the general fund? Are we offsetting stuff? It's hard to say. With regard to the particularly the point 2 and point 3, the funding for child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence, we've had a conversation with Health and Social Services about how that would be administered, and it would most likely be competitive, evidence-based grant programs to nonprofits that we are not currently funding. So it would be pretty clear that is, not offsetting something. That is things that we think can be effective, and it's new spending. Yeah.
What's the?
Oh.
What,
I'm sorry, one last thing. So substance abuse treatment is funded in ours. I think it's funded in the S version too. But we envision that a good chunk of that going to the operating dollars for the new Alaska Center for Treatment that was mandated as part of the MLP settlement with Providence. So, and the Providence settlement said we had to spend $15 million of the unallocated cash reserves of MLP to build this thing. But there's no ongoing operational funds. This would be a way to help fund that. It wouldn't come anywhere close to funding the whole thing. You still need Medicaid and probably state funding and maybe private insurance, but this would be a chunk of it.
Jonathan?
So I'm going to blatantly show my ignorance here. Can someone just remind me, bracketed material
Deleted.
is, like on page 2, where in the brackets it says funding for police and first responders?
That's deleted. So
That's
in the S
deleted,
version,
okay.
he deletes that.
Okay, okay, that's what I thought.
So, yeah.
So that would be, that is Mr. Weddleton's proposed changes from
Yeah.
a prior non-S version, the non-S version.
That's right.
That preceded this.
That's right.
Okay, and then the strikeouts are what were already adopted. If it's struck out and replaced with bold, that's already been, that's changed from the original text.
The things that are strike through, those are things that are in the original version as deletions.
Okay.
And then in this case, the underlined and bold is additions from the S version, and the bracketed is deletions from the S version.
So Mr. Weddleton's version would eliminate the combat and address child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence.
Yes. He felt that, yeah, I don't know, he had different preferred language. He wanted to go to detox, behavioral health, and homeless prevention, which are all good things. You know, I mean, we just have slightly different priorities. And it's also interesting how he really wants to get at homelessness, and we do too. But I think just pitching my version or our version, I think that it's surprising how much homelessness is driven by other things like domestic violence, and child abuse, like trying to get to the root of those issues. And the other thing, the Center for Treatment, if you talk to the health department about what they want that to look like, and they've put this out in some public documents, they want to do what's called 3.3 level services, which are people who have co-occurring substance abuse, behavioral health, and traumatic brain injury stuff. And it's something that I didn't even know about, how many people who are experiencing homelessness in Anchorage have traumatic brain injuries. It makes sense. I mean, someone gets a traumatic brain injury, their whole life falls apart, and they end up homeless. And I didn't realize that was quite so common a story, but it's a level of services not currently available in Alaska. And they've identified it as a particular need. So if and when we build that and can fund it, that's what they want to target, one of the things they want to target.
Yes.
How's the funding shaping up for fighting for either of these alcohol taxes or the sales? Like, what is that going to look like? How's it going to be different from last time?
Sure. Well, I mean, I don't want to stray too much into the politics of this versus the policy, given our respective roles here. But I will say that I think it's unlikely that the alcohol tax goes, that is, passes the Assembly, unless we have a pretty substantial commitment from the nonprofit community to fight for it this time. And the last I'd heard, they were making some progress in raising those monies. I don't know if they've raised enough. They have until Tuesday, I guess.
Yeah, and actually, before you go, Jonathan,
Yeah.
I wanted to share with you guys, Jed, you had passed along some commentary from Tiffany Hall with Recover Alaska. She wanted to put some thoughts in writing to share with us, and I don't think that made it into our whole to our materials this week. But a couple of things I'd point out from it is specifically to what Alyssa asked. We will be asking Assembly members not to proceed with the tax if we don't have sufficient funds for the campaign. The primary reason last year's loss was being outspent by the alcohol industry 8-1. We are gathering funds now, and if we don't hit internal milestones before the Assembly meeting on January 14th, we will ask them to vote it down.
Yeah. So I haven't heard from her yet. Which way are they going?
days out from that, so I was kind of wondering if we knew anything else.
Last I'd heard, they were more than halfway to their goal, but we'll see.
They do say also that they've done multiple rounds of polling to Anchorage voters to understand whether they are in favor of an alcohol tax, which the majority are, and where they would like the revenue to go, which are the three buckets that are detailed in the ordinance.
Which three buckets, though?
Yeah, and actually,
They meant the R3, so it was basically
The
public
package.
safety, the sex assault, child abuse, and domestic violence, and then substance treatment, behavioral
So
health.
this is what the polling supports.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that's also interesting because I was in a meeting with the Children's Trust yesterday, and the focus right now really is on trying to get to where Mr. Dunbar was talking about, which is getting away from just treating symptoms to treating root causes, right? And it seems to me that Mr. Dunbar's original proposed text is much more about treating the root causes of some of these issues than just treating the symptoms. I perceive Mr. Weddleton's changes to be more focused on symptom treatment. I'm just wondering, a question for Mr. Dunbar, is if they have heard anything from the nonprofit community about preference for the original language versus preference for the S version.
Well, I mean, the original version was created through a series of, back and forth with the nonprofit community. So the folks that were interested in having the alcohol tax, we worked with them to craft this. And then John, at a sort of later date, saw our version and decided to make changes to it. But I don't think he consulted. In fact, I know he didn't consult with those nonprofits when he made those changes. And I know some of those nonprofits have reached out to him and said, please don't make these changes. It happens. When we took testimony on Tuesday, there were a number of people from that nonprofit community, including Tiffany Hall, who spoke and asked us to do the original version, not the S version. Every assembly member is free to introduce any version they want.
So, to kind of share my thoughts on the alcohol tax, that I think the reasoning for it is strong and airtight. I think that if you really look at what the economic costs of alcohol are in Alaska, this is like a whisper in a hurricane as far as covering some of those. I mean, they're astronomical, as they are anywhere. So it makes perfect sense that we would be doing something like this. In fact, it almost seems like a no-brainer. What I do have a problem with, though, is that it still doesn't feel right to me in some ways to just like the voters just turned it down. Now we're going to try again, and I always feel like that. Like I worry about a backlash or about kind of resentment from the voting public about intentions from the municipality, and that's the part of it that's my one misgiving, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true, and we were worried about that too. That's why we tried to make this version significantly different from the first version. And I'll say, we're used to. I mean, how many tries did it take to sell Anchor's telephone utility? And by the way, we would have got a much better deal had we just sold it the first time. We were just hearing from Igor Vachujek. They had tried something 3 times for what was it?
Eagle River High School.
For the high school bond, So I think sometimes you have to, you present a proposal, the voters say, no, we don't like that proposal. But like I said, there's polling data that suggests that there is a majority of people that support an alcohol tax. So then we went and said, okay, well, what specifically didn't you like about it? We tried to address those, and now we're going back. And we might fail again, that's certainly possible. But I am, if the alcohol tax doesn't go, we need 8 votes again on the ballot. If this version of it doesn't go, I am happy to amend so that it's a little more palatable, and then send to the ballot this sales tax. But I am very skeptical that it will pass. But it'll be a good data point to see maybe a sales tax can pass now, or maybe if it fails, people will be more realistic about what can and cannot pass, and maybe they'll support the alcohol tax next time. So we'll see.
I don't know, what other thoughts do you guys have? What questions?
I don't know if we want to get into the details of each of the plans now. I can just tell you that kind of the element that on the sales tax that just kind of makes me question it, and I think needs a little more investigation, is this notion of property tax relief. Like, how meaningful is that gonna be over the long term? Is a real question I have. I mean, I get why it's in there. I think it's probably in there as a little carrot to entice people to vote for it, but I think over the long term, you would see that, well, not even over the long term, I think you would see it erode fairly quickly. I don't think people would actually see a substantial change in their property tax over time.
Yeah.
Through the chair, that was the point that I was going to make too, that you could kind of almost already envision the counter campaign to it, the regressiveness of it with the cap, along with the property tax. So I guess my question was, other than sort of the carrot to get that voting bloc to, vote for it, the rationale for splitting the net proceeds, and also the option of perhaps a lower percentage, and just putting it directly toward the goals of the tax itself. If that would be a way to make it less regressive, I guess, and less targeted toward that lower income.
So through the chair, so you basically, instead of making it 3%, make it 1 and make it all
Right.
above the cap?
Oh, interesting. I thought you were saying more like change
Some-
it like to 1/3 property tax relief,
No.
2/3.
No, I mean, if you just take that off the table and reduce the percentage and take away the cap, I mean, if you just do a more flat.
Yeah, I mean, I think the logic is that you need that in there to pass, but on the other hand, I think they tried that in the 90s and they still only got like 30-something%. I think they,
Mr. Chairman, so there was, back in, I think it was 06, 07.
oh, even more
somewhere
recent.
in there.
Yeah.
So I remember this because, no, it must have been 8 or 9. There was a picture of me in the paper taken by Jim Lavrakis of me sitting next to my computer, because one of the things I did at Northern was I built a calculator that would allow people to go in and put in the value of their home and see whether they would be winners or losers, right? And so, and the net takeaway was that if you're a typical Anchorage family, and you could put in the number of people in your house, but basically the dividing line at that time was if you were if you had the median home price or lower, you were a loser. You were going to pay more. It was about $310,000 or something like that. If you had that price home and were below, you were going to pay more in sales taxes than you were getting than the relief in property tax income.
Right.
And if you were above that, then and so that is one of my big challenges about property tax relief is, we already give property tax relief to veterans. We give property tax relief to the elderly. We give property tax relief in a small amount to residential homeowners, and thus push a little bit more of the property tax. And so anytime you talk about property tax relief from a sales tax, you're really talking about giving relief to commercial property owners and owners of really big residential homes. And so I get the whole carrot approach, the whole carrot, maybe that has to be in there. But the fact of the matter is that the math always works out that if you're on the bottom end, you're going to end up paying more. And the fact that only half of this goes to property tax relief, that actually means that the only people that are going to see any sort of reduction in their taxes are actually the wealthiest individuals, the people who are most able to pay, right? And commercial property owners. So that's a really hard sell for me, and I get the whole, maybe that's the carrot that we have to break the ice, but it seems like a very expensive deal.
Funny, I wrote exactly what you said. I was like, this looks like it would actually hurt the poor more than help them.
It would. Yeah, except for the very poor.
But they will get more services.
Right, except for the very poor who are going to get those
Well, I
services.
mean, it's also a significant chunk of money. You would have noticeably more Anchorage police officers. I mean, that's his goal, right?
Right.
Is that you would have more tax revenue coming in. But no, I agree with you. It's a tax break for like Walmart. Yeah, I mean, people who own these big commercial properties.
Yeah.
So, and Lance, on the agenda for OMB, did you have a presentation or something with you?
No, I think,
trying to
I
gauge
think this is an important
time-wise.
discussion and timely for you guys.
Well, it is, yeah, I think that, obviously, time is of the essence to have this conversation. I think, maybe we should think about what we want to do, whether, I mean, I think we're probably gonna be wanting to craft a resolution about what our thoughts are on these two, proposals and the iterations of them. And so is that probably what we could devote most of the rest of our discussion to is what we think and what we might want to put into a resolution. And I know that the resolution has to get to the assembly, with enough time for them to see it before Tuesday.
Yeah, and if they act on it on Tuesday, then you don't have much time. They have to act by the 28th.
But but they're both on the agenda for Tuesday, right?
They are, and they're both, I think, is this the first public hearing or the second public hearing?
You only need one.
Yeah,
Which is
okay.
the first, but
This will be the first public hearing on
Yeah.
both items, and so whether or not they get through that in the public hearing,
I think the hope is, I mean, Thomas is the chair, I think the hope is that we will vote on them, but, you just never know.
Yeah. So that's kind of the window that we're working with. It's an unknown. They could act the 14th. They have to act by the 28th.
Yeah, Jeff?
Mr. Chair, maybe just for the purposes of discussion, if we're ready to do this now, I guess I would like to propose, if there's a second, a resolution of support for the original version of the alcohol tax. And then maybe we can just kind of open up a discussion about that.
Okay. Do you want to, is it a motion?
Yes.
Second.
Second, all right, discussion?
Are we gonna do that before Andy?
You can disregard it.
Oh, okay.
That's how I stand.
Don't forget Tasha's with you.
And yes, and Tasha as well when you want to weigh in. I'd actually like to give you a few minutes at the, maybe after we have this
Sure.
conversation about what's Andy, thank you. And Tasha, do you have any input?
No, I am supportive of the original version.
Okay.
I'd like to suggest that I'm not a fan of the property tax relief in any of these. And the original of the alcohol tax has that in there as well, does it not?
No.
Oh, it doesn't. My apologies. I was reading something
It was
last night.
it was
Don't
talked
remember
about.
what I was reading.
It was talked
Okay.
about before, right?
We're talking about, it's not a large enough amount of money
Yeah, it's
to
Okay.
make that a meaningful.
yeah. So the main pieces then, the original one, the 5% instead of the 2% starting point, the language about the intended use.
And I also think,
And,
oh, Mr. Chair.
yeah, go ahead.
I also think that setting the bar at that 50% plus one, I think the amended S version with the 60%, it's just a really high bar to try to clear.
What was it last time?
The vote, it was,
You would know what was the threshold? What it was
50 plus one.
50.
Okay.
Just like we did with the room tax to approve the Denina, like something we've done in the past.
If we do move forward with this resolution, I'd like to see a caveat that we're only support if there is the benchmarks hit on the fundraising side of things. I don't think we should just do carte blanche.
I agree.
I think that's wise.
I would be supportive of that as well.
I'd like to put in the suggestion that there is that dedicated fund, that the receipts go into the dedicated fund, just to make it more palatable, even though that might not be necessary.
Yep.
Arlo?
I just need one more clarification again. By law or ordinance, we have a supposed to have a 2/3 vote on taxes,
3/5.
or 3/5. But we are choosing to throw that out and go 50% plus.
We're choosing to follow the Alaska Constitution. So
Yeah.
the Alaska Constitution allows us to amend our charter 50% plus one. So the way this works, just like the way the bed tax worked
Right.
before, is to simultaneously amend.
But the municipality had a higher bar set.
So in the charter that we are also amending, if that makes sense. So there is some controversy about whether that 3/5 is constitutional, whether the tax cap as originally constructed was constitutional in the Alaska Constitution. But what's not controversial is that municipalities have the ability to amend their own charters using 50+1. The tax cap lives inside the charter. So you use this ordinance would simultaneously impose an alcohol tax and basically carve it out from the tax cap. If that makes sense.
I just want everybody to understand, it is so hard to go backwards. It is really hard to go backwards, and for me, taxes are something we should not take lightly. I really think that 50% is, for me, is not acceptable.
And we're not amending the charter so that any future proposed tax is 50%
Yeah,
plus
it
1.
pertains
It's
to this
this
one.
specific
Yeah.
proposal.
Yeah.
But I appreciate
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I would take it the other way, Carla. Once you get rid of a tax, you can almost never bring it back. So
We're not getting rid of a
we got
tax.
rid of the income tax in the early '80s. It was one of the worst things the state ever did. And for me, I would say, if you ever want to have a tax break, you need 3/5 in the same way. But that's not what we've done. We've done it so we can do, anyway. You can give out tax breaks like candy, and without even a vote of the people. But if you try to raise revenue, there's all these restrictions. And
Try repealing the tax exemption for seniors.
well, I wouldn't. I think that's good policy too. But yeah, that's a good point. Right?
I'm
Anything
just
like
saying,
that.
people have a tolerance, so
Yeah.
you always want to be incredibly thoughtful on putting any new tax in place, because it is hard to go backwards. But the other thing is if it doesn't pass and things get worse and people get fed up, they will pass it. Eventually, they will pass it if they really want that service. So for me, I just, lowering it just so we can get it through, because, I don't know, I just,
No, I mean it's a legit source of controversy. There are people on both sides who feel both those ways.
Do people generally like the rate set at 5%? Which, by the way, Lance, remind me the amount that's estimated to bring in. Is it 11 to?
It's between 11 and 15. I think a conservative number I would say would be between 10 and 11.
Yeah. So 2% would bring us in $5 million or something like that.
Yeah, I think the feeling amongst the sponsors is that 5% is equal to the marijuana tax, so there's some fairness there. It's nowhere near the tobacco tax, which is like 40. I mean, it's some crazy percentage. But it's also large enough that, like, if we're going to do this, go through the trouble, we want to bring enough revenue for it to matter. 5% seems like a pretty good amount for that.
Yeah,
That's notably lower than the other municipal sales tax across the state, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of cities that have different levels of both sales tax and alcohol taxes. There are a bunch of cities that have.
I meant alcohol tax, yeah. So
Right.
we saw that presentation, right? Some of the smaller communities were 12%.
Yeah.
I think, Jimmy, in the assembly memorandums always provide a really good story. I mean, the ordinances are the legal binding thing, but the memorandums provide a pretty good story and as to purpose. And so on page 2 of that, they talk about sort of some of the other places. It ranges between 3 and 12%, across the state. So it varies. Fairbanks is high, Juneau is high. So anyway, higher. Frankly, it exists, so it's obviously higher.
Carla?
when this was brought to us previously, when it was on the, I think we reviewed it before it was on the ballot last time. But one of the questions that I asked Felix, I believe it was whether or not, I mean, obviously Char is going to be against this, right? They don't want this to happen. So my concern always with government is that you collect 11, the government takes their slice, you hand it off to public service places, and they all take their slice, and then what gets actually utilized is far less than what was collected. And so I asked him at that point, did we ever sit down with Char and say, this is probably going to happen. Can we get a self-imposed 5% from you, given directly to the nonprofit of your choosing? And Felix admitted that nobody had talked to them about maybe trying that, which would give much more money to the nonprofits. And I don't know with the new tax laws whether or not it would give anybody a tax break, them a tax break for donating straight to the nonprofit. But it makes so much more sense if we can negotiate that than it does to give the government more money. I mean, no offense, but the government is the most inefficient owner of your money. So,
Well, I mean, my mind's put at ease mostly by the language does pretty strongly dedicate it towards specific uses, and so that's
but
not.
you still have administration costs.
Yeah.
And I can also tell you, Carla, that not every alcohol retailer is a member of CHAR.
True. I mean, it's gonna come, obviously it's coming down, it's raining down on them one way or the other.
It's a pretty rare and remarkable thing when an industry steps forward and says, "Yeah, go ahead and tax."
Yeah, but we're gonna,
And
so
I
we're
don't know
gonna have
if
the
that's-
government do it instead.
I mean, I don't know if that's like an alternative that's like something that's really likely to happen. You know?
But nobody's tried.
And I don't know, and I can't speak to whatever conversations might have happened with Char and the Muni or anyone else. I don't know.
I've been on the assembly almost 4 years now, and there's been alcohol tax proposals and other just like specific cases where we're working on homelessness issues, for example. And the industry has come to us many times and said, we want to do this thing, we have this great plan, we'll do this ourselves, kind of like what you're talking about. But it never materialized, it never actually happens. And
But
we've
now
said,
for
well, we
us-
said in the past, like, we will absolutely work with you, like, we want to help you.
But now, Forrest, you're gonna come to them and say, it's gonna happen this way,
Yeah.
or it's gonna happen this way. You decide.
Right, I know, but, well, first of all, they feel like they're in a position of strength because they won last time. But I'll say, like, they've had the opportunity, the years I've been on the assembly, to do the things that they have promised, and oftentimes they don't. I mean, another example I'll give you is, we just imposed a law on Airbnb and VRBO to make sure that they pay the bed tax they were supposed to be collecting. And Airbnb actually, I think, correct me if I'm wrong in this, Airbnb was doing it was pretty good. But then these other operators like VRBO were just like, no, we're just not going to do it. And so they were legally required to do it, and they still didn't do it until we imposed it upon them. So I guess I'm just a little more, maybe I'm a little more skeptical of people's benevolent natures.
You know me, I'm the most skeptical person I know. But on the other hand, can that be put in here? If it passes, that they will have a chance to voluntarily sign up to voluntarily.
But here's the thing, I appreciate what you're, excuse me, Mr. Chair, I appreciate what you're saying about the extra layer for government, right? But it doesn't take too many operators to free ride that system to then overwhelm the inefficiency of government, right? So the thing about government is, yes, I have to put in this administration, but I get 100% participation. Whereas if you come over here and ask for 5%, and it's only hold on, let me finish. Is if I come over here and say I'm going to ask you for 5%, and you're going to avoid this tax, and I miss 10% of members, then I've just wiped away the efficiency gains relatively simply. Yeah.
No, what makes all of you think that the difference between voluntarily doing it or not paying the tax at all, which is what he just said happens, what's going to be the difference? If they're bad operators, they're bad operators, whether they have a tax coming at them or not, right? But the thing is what is the difference between the Muni possibly collecting this tax and passing it on, or getting a report from each operator that says this is the amount of money and this is who we gave it to.
Something that's enforceable, though.
And you're talking about, and we're talking about how many,
Quit giving your government so much
how
power.
many hundreds or maybe thousands of different vendors that you have to coordinate.
Okay,
on.
if you want it, hey,
I was
I
saying,
always say,
Carla,
you can have it.
when I was door knocking this last time in 2019, the number one thing I heard from people at their door was not lower my taxes. It was, I want more police officers. I think they're a real public safety concern.
I'm not talking about taxes, though.
Well,
I'm talking
so I mean,
about.
a percentage of this goes to police officers, and that is something that, in my opinion, only government can and should provide, right? And you're right that we're going to use nonprofits in some of these cases because they have proven, systems to do it.
So you're saying if they donate, the Muni has a rule that they cannot accept the donations. The Muni has a rule that police force
If
cannot
it's
accept the
donated, it's
donations.
no different than a tax. It's still go through all that administration.
So I am.
So we're losing those efficiencies. I mean, if you're talking about
So-
taking car and having them donate,
If I am Brown Jug and I choose to donate to Awake, or I choose to donate,
But
that
he's saying
that has
that-
nothing to do with them.
He's saying this goes to pay for police as well, so.
I understand.
You can't get any new
Well,
police if you're only a voluntary.
So, hang on, we are gonna
self-imposed
have
tax.
to, we are gonna have to kind of direct this forward.
It's less, it's much less.
So, I always appreciate Carla does play devil's advocate very effectively on this
No,
one.
I just don't understand why everybody wants to give the government their money. I don't get it.
Because they like services from the government.
There are probably some philosophical questions here that can resolve
They like
in
having
the
a
next 5
military, for
minutes. But,
Oh,
but
that's-
I think,
Forrest, you're being ridiculous.
Tasha, were you, I think I heard you start to speak maybe? Or maybe you're just exhaling, I don't know.
Actually, Tasha wished she was here.
I have to sign off now.
All right, we wish you were here.
Thanks, Tasha.
So I think, I'm mostly hearing consensus from a majority of us, I think, on the major pieces that we agree. It seems like there's, I noticed we stopped talking about the Dyson sales tax proposal kind of early on. I'm interpreting that, and tell me if I'm wrong, to mean that there's probably not much support for that among this group. Am I off on that?
I only ask if we are ready for resolution, and we already have one kind of caveat that we're only going forward if the fundraising is hit.
Right.
Do we want to say that we have some interest in this in the absence of the alcohol tax?
'Cause- sorry.
We could leave it maybe broad to say something like that, but in the absence of an alcohol tax, we would support,
Other revenue.
we would support another form of revenue, above cap revenues.
And that might be broad enough that if somehow Project 20s comes up, maybe there's, but I don't know that we want to support either of those as a group, so maybe there needs to be a little discussion whether or not we want those.
Right, and then, I don't know, what do you guys think? What's the way to say that?
So first of all, I would say this alcohol tax should be the number one priority. I agree with the caveat that they have committed to fundraising goals, and if those aren't met by Tuesday, and they are going to step forward and say, please don't put this forward, then that's fine. We won't push that any further. I have a lot of questions about the sales tax that I don't think I'm prepared to throw support behind right now.
Yeah.
And I also, frankly, I have some questions. I like the Project 20's idea, but I have some questions, and I'd like to see us workshop that. And it's going to be really interesting. I'm really hoping that we can talk about that at our meeting on the 24th.
So,
and put sort of a more prolonged, thoughtful discussion on that and how that would work over a longer period of time. So I guess I'm not prepared to have a contingency plan.
and on that, Moira had reached out to a couple of us and said that, it sounds like she's not really expecting that it's going to move forward on this ballot. Kind of the gist of it. I think that in my opinion, there's a great concept there that probably does need more time to come to fruition, and so I think that it's not. I think we're not taking that totally off the table as a discussion item. So I think it is something we can talk about at our strategy session. So I think we broadly agree then on the kind of the original version of the alcohol tax, supported in a resolution, that taking priority over maybe other immediate term proposals. But in the absence of the meeting of benchmarks, we do support positive revenues over and above the tax cap. Is that generally where we are? With some opposition, perhaps.
I agree with you, but on the sales tax, I'm not opposed to it, but I think it needs a lot more work.
I
It
agree.
can't go into this resolution.
Yeah, I
And the other thing, just to kind of speak to Carla's point, and I respect where you're coming from on this. What I like about the alcohol tax is that it's not regressive. It's the people who consume the most that pay the most. It's the people who don't consume don't pay.
I don't consume, but I'm still against it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So, Lance, you're able to, or your team's able to help us draft
I will.
some language? Okay.
So, if I could just give me a minute to summarize, if I can. So, for my record, I had a main motion from Jed, and then Alyssa seconded, and that it will be proposal to support the original version of the alcohol tax at 5% as presented on December 17th, and some of the whereases where you appreciate or I'll say something, these aren't the exact words, but it's that it's not property, it doesn't include the property tax relief, so it provides additional revenues for additional services. Setting the bar at 50 plus 1 is acceptable. That the benchmark on funding is an important element to the proposal, and that that you would like to see a dedicated fund for revenue established for if it passes. And then I'll add something, and I'm going to need some help on this one. Absence the alcohol tax, alternative revenues should continue to be pursued. Not in this order, but the commission's considered projects 20s. You like the idea. You think it's a good concept, but the BAC needs more information before they can make a recommendation to put that one on the ballot. And you're not a fan of the sales tax. You feel that that it's regressive, and but based on the sales tax as a whole, you're not opposed to the principle, but you need more information or something like that. Did I miss anything?
Just ask my question there with respect to the sales tax. Sales taxes are always going to be regressive by definition. They're regressive.
Okay.
By the way, I do want to point out, and sorry, property taxes also are regressive. I don't know if people know
Yeah,
that.
they are right.
Yeah.
So, so I guess my understanding was that our actual issue with the sales tax was maybe needs more work, a little bit more work. But I think it was actually the issue of property tax relief that is the big holdup within the sales tax. Is that the case, that we're opposed to a sales tax in general, or we're opposed to a sales tax that is dedicated to property tax relief? I'm not asking, I guess, this to go into the.
I think my point was what I heard Jed say, and I'm not in his head. On principle, sales taxes are something that could be considered, but you do feel that this sales tax is, as it relates to property tax relief, is aggressive.
I don't know that we would need to be that specific.
Yeah.
I mean, I have other concern. I'd like the cap, for example.
Right.
Or I mean, there's a whole bunch. We've had it for 24 hours maybe, and I just don't know that we all fully comprehend the consequences.
And
Okay.
I think, and maybe there's something to the effect of like a sales tax that addresses some regressivity concerns or something along those lines. Maybe it should be pretty broad at this point. And I don't think that we've all formally, formed a strong opinion on general sales taxes in this conversation.
Okay. Process-wise, the way we'll do this, given the window, I will draft it. I will run it by Nolan to make sure that I got most of the concepts, and then I will send it to all of you. You need to send your comments directly to me. I will edit it, and then when I think I've got everything in place, I will send it to Nolan, I will send it to Alyssa. If they feel that it's captured the conversation, then they have the ability to, and then basically, once I have that, I will send it to you. You guys tell me you like it or you don't like it, and we'll do that electronically. And when you reply to me, do not CC all, just to me, okay? That's important.
Okay.
So,
Thank you then. And let's
I was gonna say, like,
let's try
I was
to
probably gonna
Anyway.
let's try to turn it around pretty fast so we can get it possibly. Now I know we're a little bit over, but since we've got Andy and Mr. Donnelly here, can you guys in like 2 or 3 minutes maybe tell us the latest on the school district?
Well, Andy can go into further detail, but we're looking at a $20 million gap for a whole harmless budget, which is a problem. We're looking at decreased population for the 4th year in a row, which impacts us because state funding goes down. And because of the way that the funding cycle is, we get a double whammy because we not only lose the state funds, but we also we lose additional municipal funds because the municipal funds are based on how much state funds we get. So we get it. The way it works out is we get punished twice. It's not a year to year directly across. We've got the first proposal projection pro forma, right? That's what it's called, about how the budget would look, but we don't have any specific list of proposals about how to close the gap yet. The school board and the assembly, I just got back in town last night, had a meeting yesterday about the bonds. I don't know where the assembly's gonna be going on the bond proposition. As you know, it passed on a close vote, 4-3. A lot of concern by the minority members on the school board that it was, there were issues. Personally, I was disappointed that the school security projects that appear on the 6-year capital plan, not this year, next year, but they're now 3 years out, weren't on that bond. It was only about 13 million, but they were, hardening especially our elementary schools against outside threats. I would like to see that before the voters sooner rather than later, being postponed. We have just been lucky that, where there have been outside threats, they've come at schools that we've already modified to defend against them. And let's just keep our fingers crossed, that we don't have any, those kind of incidents here. And of course, there was a lot of mixed testimony about Inlet View School, whether it should be a remodel or whether it should be a tear down and replace. The board on a 4-3 vote went with a tear down and replace. There was a significant opposition from the community about that. A lot of threats. If you do this, we will just fight the whole bond proposition. So there is that element out there. Then there was the Eagle River issue. There's a lot of threats from the Eagle River community that the total redo of the greening is going to make them vote against the entire package because they.
Sorry, we are just about out of time.
So there will be there's you can project there'll be significant opposition to the budget, the bond as it's been put forward.
Anything you wanted to throw into that?
Yeah, I was just going to give you real quick our timelines. We will plug that $40 million or $20 million gap that we presented last time. The administration will reconcile that between now and the next couple of weeks. We'll give it to the board at the end of January. Introduction February 4th, approval on February 18th, and then it's due to the meeting the first Monday in March. And I'm not exactly sure what the 2 meetings in March are for the assembly, but then it'll be for their approval.
The 10th and the 16th.
10th and 16th?
Of March, okay.
Our assembly meetings.
Okay. Yeah, some heavy stuff there.
And then the other thing is the governor, since last time we met, the governor released his budget, holding formula funding flat, except with the exception of bond debt had a 50% reduction in it again for next year.
An additional 50% or the
Same 50%.
Same, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, guys. We then are meeting on January 24th, by the way, for our strategy session. I was actually going to send a quick short little pre-work questionnaire that I'd love it if it's just a few questions so that it'll help get us started with our priorities for the year, and it's been working well. So excited for that. I'm hoping as many of us as possible can be there. It's most of the day on the 24th. It's at the LUSAC.
Yes.
And it'll be a good chance for us to strategize for the coming year. Otherwise, motion to adjourn. Second? All right. Then I think we're done here. Thanks a bunch, guys.
Hey, if you guys